My daughter gave me a choice: obey her husband or leave my own house. So I smiled, packed my suitcase, and walked out without a word. 7 days later, I woke up to 22 missed calls and one message I never thought I would receive. I want to start at the end of something because that's where this story really begins. It was a Tuesday in November, just past 4 in the afternoon, and the light was doing that thing it does in November, going gray and flat and quiet, like the sky had given up on the day early. I had spent most of the afternoon at Kroger. 4 hours. 4 hours with a list Tiffany had emailed me because she'd read somewhere that Structure helped older people stay organized when they shopped. I was 67 years old. I had 30 years in commercial banking, 2 master's degrees, and a retirement portfolio that most financial advisors would consider genuinely impressive. But I had a list. Harry's brand of beer was on it. 2 six-packs, Corona Light because he preferred it after work. I carried the bags in myself. I always did. The front door opened onto the living room, and the first thing I saw was the back of Harry's head. He was in my recliner. Martha's recliner, technically. She'd picked it out at a furniture store in Billings 30 years ago. Paid for it with money she'd saved from her classroom aide salary. Hauled it home in the back of a borrowed Chevy pickup because she said it was the most comfortable thing she'd ever sat in. She died 4 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. She was in that chair the morning they took her to the hospital for the last time. She'd been reading a library book. She left a bookmark in it. The bookmark was still there. Harry had his feet up, beer in hand, eyes on my television. He didn't look up when I walked in. "Old man," he said, "get me another Corona." I set the grocery bags down on the floor. I'm not going to pretend my heart didn't do something when he said that. I'd been absorbing small insults from Harry for 5 years. The rolled eyes across dinner tables, the dismissive sighs whenever I said anything, the jokes that were never quite jokes, the particular way he had of talking to me in front of Tiffany that managed to be condescending without ever giving me anything specific enough to call out. I had told myself, more times than I could count, that he was just a difficult personality, that Tiffany loved him, that the most important thing was keeping the peace. But something about those 2 words, old man, in that room, next to that chair, with Martha's bookmark still tucked into a library book on the side table, landed differently than anything before it. "Excuse me?" I said. "You heard me?" I had. I just needed a moment to decide what I was going to do about it. I said something about needing to put the groceries away first. Practical. Calm. Harry looked at me then, actually turned his head and looked, with the specific expression of a man who finds an obstacle annoying but not worth his full attention. Like I was a slow elevator, something to wait out. "What's the problem?" he said. "You're already standing." "The problem," I said carefully, "is that this is my house." He stood up slow. He was 41 years old, 6'2", broad across the shoulders, and he had learned somewhere that his size was a language. He spoke it now, rising to his full height, letting the silence stretch. "Your house?" he said. "Tiffany and I live here. Because I let you." We stood there for a moment that felt longer than it was. Then Tiffany came in from the kitchen. She looked at Harry first. Not at me, Harry first. I noticed that. I had noticed it, at various moments, for years. The way she always checked his face before she said anything, calibrated her expression to his, made a small internal adjustment. I had told myself it was just how some marriages work. I had told myself a lot of things. She looked at Harry, then at me, and I watched her make a calculation. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to understand the particular arithmetic of a woman who has, over a long span of small surrenders, traded one kind of loyalty for another kind of survival, and doesn't yet know the full cost of the exchange. "Dad," she said, "just get him the beer. It's not worth fighting over." I stared at my daughter. She stared back, and then she stepped sideways, toward him. It wasn't a large movement, maybe 6 inches, but it was deliberate, and we both knew what it meant. "You need to decide," she said. Her voice was very steady, steadier than I expected. "Either you help Harry and do what he asks, or you pack your things and leave." The room went completely still. Even the television seemed to go quiet. I had been quiet for 5 years. I had paid their mortgage, that $847 a month. Automatic transfer, 52 consecutive months, which comes to just over $96,000. I had carried their car insurance. I had bought their groceries. I had replaced their water heater when it failed in February, paid for Tiffany's root canal in April, covered the registration on Harry's truck when he said money was tight in June. I had stepped over beer cans in my own hallway and breathed around the cigarette smell that had gotten into Martha's curtains and never said a word about the $2,000 that went missing from the emergency cash I kept in the kitchen drawer. I had been so quiet that I had almost convinced myself the quiet was fine, that it was generosity, that it was love. "All right," I said. Harry's smirk had the particular quality of a man who has always won and doesn't think to wonder why. "Good. Now about that, I'll pack." His smile died so fast it was almost medical. "Dad?" Tiffany took a step forward, one hand half raised. I was already walking to the bedroom. I want to be honest about what that walk felt like because people always assume the dramatic moments are the hardest. They aren't. The walk to the bedroom was the easiest thing I did that day. It felt clarifying in the way that a decision, once made, sometimes clarifies everything around it. What was hard was the 30 seconds I stood in my bedroom doorway before I started, looking at the room I'd shared with Martha for 26 years, the quilt on the bed that she'd made herself during a particularly bad winter, piece by piece, while she was going through chemotherapy the first time, her reading glasses on her nightstand, the ones I'd never moved, even 4 years after she was gone, because moving them had always felt like the final admission of something I wasn't ready to admit. The photograph of the 2 of us at Flathead Lake in the summer of 1998, young and sunburned and laughing at something I could no longer remember, but which must have been funny because we both looked very happy. I took the photograph. I packed carefully. Clothes for 2 weeks. My medications. The metformin, the blood pressure pills, the low-dose aspirin my cardiologist insisted on. My actual reading glasses. The laptop. The small leather folder that I had been filling for 14 months with bank statements, insurance policy numbers, account access codes, and documentation I had quietly, systematically been building for reasons I hadn't wanted to examine too closely until now. The fireproof box in the closet held the important documents. Property deed, insurance policies, Martha's death certificate, the estate papers. I took those too. I was methodical about it. I have always been methodical. It is perhaps the most useful thing I know about myself. Neither of them said anything when I rolled my suitcase through the living room and out the front door. Harry had sat back down. He had the television up louder than before. Tiffany was standing in the kitchen doorway with her arms crossed, and when I passed her, I looked at her and she looked at me and she didn't say a word, and neither did I. And I have thought about that moment many times since. I put the suitcase in the trunk of my Buick LeSabre and drove to the Lakeview Motor Inn on Route 9. It cost $64 a night. The Wi-Fi was slow. The parking lot smelled like wet pavement and diesel, and the coffee maker in the room needed descaling. But the bed was clean, and the door had a working deadbolt and a chain lock. And I sat on the edge of the mattress for a long time doing absolutely nothing, which I think I needed. Then I opened my laptop. 30 years in commercial banking teaches you things that are difficult to learn anywhere else. Not just how money moves, though that is useful, but how systems talk to each other. What triggers a flag? What creates a paper trail? What documentation an institution requires before it will take action? And what documentation you need to build for yourself before you need it and before anyone else knows you're building it. I had been building mine for 14 months. It started with a phone call I overheard by accident. I'd gotten up at 2 in the morning for a glass of water. I do that. My cardiologist says it's benign. Something about blood pressure and sleep cycles. And Harry was in the living room on his phone, talking low and fast in the way people talk when they're confident no one can hear them. I caught 2 things clearly before I retreated to the kitchen. The name of an attorney in town named Gregory Fells, who worked on Commerce Street and whose name I didn't recognize from the family matters I'd dealt with. And the phrase, "if the old man's name is still on it." I went back to bed. In the morning, I told myself it was nothing. A business deal, maybe. Something unrelated to me. But I started running monthly checks on the county property records portal. My name was still on the house. It had always been on the house. I'd bought the property in 1991 with Martha, paid off the mortgage in 2014, and when Martha died, the deed had passed to me alone. We'd held it in joint tenancy with right of survivorship, which was standard, and the transfer had been handled cleanly. The property was mine, solely mine. By March, I had started photographing the mail before I sorted it. Not all of it. Mostly the pieces that seemed slightly wrong. Envelopes from financial institutions I didn't have accounts with. A letter from a law office addressed to Harry at my address, already opened and refolded carelessly, as though he'd read it and put it back without thinking. A form from the county assessor's office that I hadn't requested. Small things. The kind of things you don't mention because they might be nothing, but you document because they might not be. By June, I had started keeping a log. Dates, observations, what I'd seen and when. I have the habit from banking, the instinct that a good contemporaneous record is worth more than a perfect memory. By September, I had a folder on my laptop with 847 photographs and a log that ran to 41 pages. By the Tuesday, I walked out. I had everything I needed. I made 8 calls from the motel. I documented every one. The first call stopped the automatic mortgage payment. There was no mortgage on the house. I owned it free and clear, had for 11 years, but I'd been making a voluntary monthly transfer into an escrow account at Harry and Tiffany's request, ostensibly for property maintenance and taxes. I called the bank that held the account and requested a stop on the transfer and a full accounting of the balance. The balance was $14,220. I transferred every cent to a personal account Harry had no access to. The second call removed Harry's truck and Tiffany's car from my State Farm policy. I'd been carrying both vehicles since 2021 at Harry's request, $287 a month, added to my existing premium, because his driving record made standalone coverage prohibitive. What the State Farm agent told me when I called, in the careful, neutral tone of someone delivering professionally uncomfortable information, was that a claim had been filed on that policy 8 months earlier, a rear-end collision. The claim had paid out $6,400. I had never been notified. I had never been asked. It had just happened quietly on an account in my name, and the check had gone wherever it went. I sat with that one for a moment. Then I continued down the list. The third call removed Tiffany as an authorized user on every account. I held the phone for a long time before I made this one. She was my daughter. Whatever was happening between her and Harry, and I had been slowly, reluctantly constructing a theory of what was happening between them for more than a year. She was still my daughter, but she had stood beside him. She had looked me in the eye in my own living room and told me to leave. She had made a choice, and I had to respond to the choice she had actually made, not the choice I wished she had made. I made the call. The other 5 calls covered the utilities, all in my name, and the property insurance, which I restructured to exclude personal property belonging to non-family member occupants, and 2 calls to attorneys. One was to update my estate documents. The other was to ask a question about adverse possession law in our state. That last call is the one that kept me awake. desk. The attorney was Patricia Howe. She had been in property law for 22 years and had an office above the title company on 4th Street. She was methodical and specific, and she did not waste time, which I respected immediately. I described what I knew without editorializing: the overheard conversation, the inquiries I'd found, the letter in the stack of assessor mail. The letter was the important thing. Harry had submitted an inquiry to the county assessor asking for information about adverse possession procedures in our county. The letter was the response. It had been addressed to him at my address, opened, and then apparently left in a pile of mail, lost in the ordinary accumulation of a busy household, which is probably exactly what he'd intended when he put it back. Adverse possession. The legal doctrine by which a person who occupies another party's property, openly, continuously, hostilely, and exclusively for a statutory period, can eventually bring a claim for title. Not easily, not automatically, but the legal pathway exists, and smart bad actors know it exists. Patricia was quiet for a long moment. In this state, she said, the statutory period for adverse possession is 10 years. He's been in the house for 5 years, I said. Then he's halfway to the clock, she said. But, Mr. Patterson, and I want to be very direct with you here, adverse possession is almost impossible to establish against a known legal owner who is actively paying taxes, maintaining the property, and in residence. What you're describing is more likely a strategy of leverage. He's building a record, establishing documented occupancy, not necessarily to win a claim, but to have a claim to threaten you with. A threat toward what end? She paused. A buyout, a transfer, an agreement that avoids litigation at terms favorable to him. I thought about the 52 mortgage payments. If I left the property, I said, and he remained, that would change the calculus significantly, she said, especially if there were evidence that you had vacated voluntarily. I thanked her. I told her I'd be in touch. I hung up and looked at the ceiling of the motel room for a long time. Then I added a 9th call to my list, this one to a second attorney, David Park at Park & Associates, 20 years in litigation, to discuss an eviction filing. 4 days later, Bob Garrett found me at the diner on Main Street. Bob had been a loan officer at First National Bank for 27 years. We'd overlapped for most of my career, and while I wouldn't have called us close friends exactly, we had the particular bond of people who spend decades in the same rooms making the same kinds of careful decisions. He was semi-retired now, consulting 2 days a week, which meant he still heard things. He slid into the booth across from me without asking permission, which told me immediately that whatever he had to say was serious. Harry tried to pull a home equity line last week, he said, keeping his voice low. $50,000. He submitted paperwork claiming the property was jointly owned, that he had a 50% ownership stake. I put my coffee down. Title search killed it in 40 minutes, Bob said. Property's solely in your name. Clear title, no liens, no encumbrances. He looked at me steadily. Clark, the papers he submitted weren't just wrong. They were forged. A co-ownership document with a notary stamp from a notary who retired and surrendered her commission in 2019. Someone recreated the stamp badly. How badly? Badly enough that a second-year title officer caught it without running it up the chain. He paused. There's more. Word around town is he owes money to people out of the casino over in Harmon County. Serious money. 18,000, maybe closer to 25. The kind of people who don't send collection letters. I thought about the overheard phone call 14 months ago. I thought about the pattern I'd been watching. Bob, I said, who processed the loan application before the title search killed it? He told me. I wrote down the name. I met Detective Jim Morrison at the County Sheriff's Department on Thursday morning. He had 19 years on the force and the specific professional manner of someone who has learned to listen without expression, because expression costs you information. He didn't disbelieve people immediately, but he needed to see the documents before he adjusted his posture. It was, I recognized, exactly the approach I had used for 30 years in banking when someone came to me with a story. I came with documents. I sat across from him for 40 minutes and laid out the entire architecture, the 847 photographs, the 41 pages of log entries, the financial records showing what I had paid and when, the insurance claim I had never been told about, the overheard conversation, the letter about adverse possession, Bob Garrett's account of the forged documents, a printed record of the 8 calls I'd made from the motel with their confirmation numbers. Morrison went through everything without comment. He asked 3 clarifying questions, none of which were the questions I expected. He wrote things down in a small notebook with a mechanical pencil. Then he closed the folder and set his pencil down. Mr. Patterson, he said, I'm going to tell you something that's going to require you to stay very calm. I told him I spent 30 years in banking. I had some experience with staying calm. The attorney Harry consulted about adverse possession. Gregory Fells on Commerce Street. We have a file on Fells. He's been on our radar for 26 months for what we believe is a pattern of fraudulent real estate conveyances targeting elderly property owners. He takes on clients who have, or can manufacture, a position inside a target property, helps them build a paper record of occupancy, and then coaches them through either a legal claim or a negotiated transfer. Morrison paused. We've been waiting for documentation clean enough to move on him. What you've brought me is the cleanest set of records we've seen. The word elderly had landed, briefly, like something I needed to absorb, but I let it go. Harry isn't working a scheme he invented, Morrison continued. He's working a template. We've seen variants of it in 3 other counties over the past 4 years. The casino debt is part of the structure. It's how they get leverage over the person they recruit to run the inside game. Get someone into a hole, offer them a way out. The way out involves a property. The property belongs to someone with assets who has a family member who can be positioned inside. I held very still. My daughter, I said. Morrison looked at me. The professional expression held, but there was something careful underneath it. We don't know the full extent of her involvement at this point. That's something the investigation will need to establish. I nodded. It was the hardest nod I have ever performed. The eviction notice was filed Thursday afternoon. Patricia Howe submitted the restraining order petition the same day. Morrison expedited his supporting affidavit, and a judge I had never met signed the order Friday morning. It covered the house and a 500-foot perimeter. It named Harry. It required him to vacate within 72 hours and prohibited contact. It did not name Tiffany. I did not go home. Morrison asked me not to. His team wanted to document the interior of the property before I returned, cataloging whatever evidence of the adverse possession scheme was present. Apparently, Fells coached his clients to create a specific kind of physical record. Repair receipts filed in the occupant's name, utility correspondence rerouted, photographs staged to make the client appear to be the primary resident managing the household. I thought about all the mail I had photographed. I hoped it was useful. Instead, I sat in my motel room on a Friday night and thought about Tiffany. I had been thinking about her, really thinking about her, in a different way for the past 14 months, asking myself questions I hadn't wanted to ask. When had she changed? Not the small changes of adulthood, not the normal distance that develops when children build their own lives, but the specific change I had been watching since Harry arrived. The way she checked his expression before she said things. The way she managed information between us, filtering what he knew, filtering what I knew, always positioning herself in the middle. The way she had stepped beside him on Tuesday. Had she been recruited? Had she been coerced? Had she understood what she was participating in? I didn't know. And the not knowing was harder than any of the rest of it. Saturday morning, 22 missed calls. I let them accumulate for about 40 minutes before I looked at the screen. The calls were from numbers I didn't recognize. 2 from Tiffany, 1 from Bob Garrett's number, and 1 from Detective Morrison. The text message, the one I hadn't expected from a number I didn't have saved, said only, "He told them you abandoned her. He's outside First National right now making a scene." I drank the rest of my terrible motel coffee. I put on my jacket. I drove to First National Bank. Harry had gathered somewhere between 12 and 15 people on the sidewalk in front of the bank. A few of them appeared to know him. The rest were bystanders who had stopped when they heard a voice raised. He was working the small crowd with real commitment, arms gesturing, head shaking, the performance of an aggrieved man laying out an injustice to anyone who would listen. He had the specific energy of someone who has decided his best move is theater, and who has made that decision because he's run out of other moves. He saw my Buick pull to the curb. He spread his arms wide. He actually spread his arms wide, a gesture borrowed from television, aimed at the crowd with maximum stagecraft. "There he is," he announced. "The man who threw his own daughter away." I got out of the car. I walked toward him. He held the gesture, arms still spread, voice still carrying, and I walked through it like it was fog. I stopped 3 feet away from him. "Hello, Harry," I said. "How are the gambling debts?" The crowd went quiet. There is a particular quality to that kind of quiet. Not the silence of boredom, but the silence of attention, of people recalibrating. His face went through 3 separate colors. "You miserable old... I can document every dollar I spent supporting you for 5 years," I said. I was not raising my voice. I was not performing for the crowd. I was speaking at a normal conversational volume calmly, the way I had spoken to difficult clients for 30 years. Every mortgage payment into the maintenance escrow, every insurance premium, every grocery run, every car registration, every utility bill. I have bank records, insurance records, and 847 photographs. He was completely still. "I have recordings of 3 phone conversations," I said. "I have a copy of your inquiry to the county assessor's office about adverse possession. I have documentation of a notary stamp that was retired in 2019 and appears on loan documents you submitted last week." I let all of that sit. "Can you document," I said, "where your paychecks went?" He had nothing. There was nothing in his face but the specific blankness of a man whose strategy has evaporated and who has not yet decided what to do in its absence. He turned and walked away. Fast, hands jammed in his jacket pockets, head down, not looking back. The crowd watched him go. I watched him go. When he'd turned the corner, I turned around and walked back to my Buick. My phone buzzed before I reached it. "Clark," Morrison said. "We went through the loan documents overnight. There's something I need to tell you." I stopped walking. The street was quiet around me. November light, gray and flat, the sky somewhere between cloud and clarity. "Harry wasn't working alone," he said. "We know about Fells, but the forged notary stamp, the template for it, we've now matched it to 2 other fraudulent applications filed in the past 18 months. Same stamp, same date formatting on the notary line, same specific error in the seal embossing." A pause. Both of the other applications involved a family member who facilitated access to the target property. I didn't say anything. "In one of those cases," Morrison said, his voice careful and deliberate, "the family member was a daughter. I want to tell you I didn't already know. I want to tell you that the call was a complete shock, that I hadn't been constructing this understanding slowly, painfully, over 14 months of watching and documenting and asking myself questions I didn't want to ask. But I had known, at some level, for a long time. I had known, and I had not known, because not knowing was easier to live inside. What followed, the calls, the interviews, the documents that became Exhibit A through Exhibit F in the proceedings, confirmed what I had feared, and also, in some ways, complicated it. Tiffany cooperated cooperated fully. Sandra Okonkwo, a public defender with 4 years of practice and a meticulous, unhurried manner that I found immediately reassuring, sat beside her through every interview. Tiffany gave them everything. Every conversation with Harry, every instruction she'd received from Fells, every piece of documentation she had helped move or copy or sign. The full picture of 5 years. What the full picture showed was not a woman who had orchestrated a scheme against her father. It was a woman who had been slowly, systematically convinced by a man she loved and feared that her father was an obstacle, that the house was their future, that the only way to be safe was to help. It was a picture I recognized not from my own experience, but from things I had read, from conversations I'd had with people who understood these patterns better than I did, from the specific quality of Tiffany's voice when she gave her statement, the flatness of it, the lack of affect, the way she described her own actions without defense or excuse, which is not how people sound when they are calculating. It's how they sound when they have been worn down to something simpler than strategy. I'm not naive about what she did. I'm not pretending the harm wasn't real, but I am her father, and I know her. And what I heard in her voice, what I understood when I read the transcripts, was not a woman who had wanted to take my house. It was a woman who had been convinced over 5 years of small surrenders that helping Harry was the only way to survive Harry. That is a different thing, a harder thing, a thing I am still working to understand fully. The charges came down 3 weeks later. Gregory Fells, 4 counts of fraudulent conveyance, 2 counts of elder financial abuse, 1 count of conspiracy to commit real estate fraud. His record turned out to be a thread. Pulling it unraveled 3 other cases in adjacent counties, and I was told eventually that 6 other families received some form of restitution as a result of what my documentation had provided. I don't say that to be proud of it. I say it because those 6 families deserved to know it happened. Harry, 2 counts of document forgery, 1 count of attempted mortgage fraud, 1 count of elder financial abuse. The gambling debts totaled $31,000 at the time of his arrest, not the $18,000 Bob had first estimated. The people he owed it to were eventually charged in a separate proceeding, and Morrison told me it was better not to ask too many questions about that part of it. Tiffany, no charges, in exchange for complete cooperation. She moved into an apartment in a town about 40 minutes away, with help from a domestic violence advocacy organization that Morrison connected her to, a woman named Carol, who ran a support program, and who called me once, briefly, just to tell me that Tiffany was doing the work. That was all she said. It was enough. We talk on the phone sometimes, Tiffany and I. It is slow and careful, and there is a lot of silence in it, but it is real silence, the kind that holds space rather than closes it. I have not asked her to explain herself. I have told her once that I love her and am waiting, and she said she knows, and we left it there for now. We are figuring it out. We will keep figuring it out. I moved back into the house in the 3rd week of December. The deputy who walked me through the property apologized for the state of things. Harry had not treated the place with care in the weeks before the eviction order was finally enforced. The back bedroom windows had been left open during a cold snap. Martha's curtains, the ones I had never changed because changing them felt too final, had been damaged by moisture and would need to be replaced. I stood in the living room for a long time. The recliner was still there. I sat down in it. I put my feet up. I put the photograph of Martha at Flathead Lake on the side table next to the library book with her bookmark in it, and I sat there in the gray December light and let myself feel everything I had been holding at careful arm's length for 6 weeks. I had been so careful for so long, so methodical, so controlled, and those qualities had served me. They had given me the documentation and the paper trail and the 8 calls and the 847 photographs. But sitting in Martha's chair that afternoon, I let myself stop being careful for a little while, and I cried, which I hadn't done in 4 years. Not since the morning I came home from the hospital without her. I cried for a while. Then I got up and made dinner. Bob Garrett stopped by the diner a few months later, after everything had settled. He said people at First National kept asking him how I'd managed the whole thing, how I'd walked out of my own home with a suitcase and come back with the entire situation resolved, charges filed, property secure. What did you tell them? I asked. He poured sugar into his coffee and thought about it. I told them 30 years in banking teaches you that the paperwork always matters more than the argument, that the man who controls the documentation controls the outcome. He wasn't wrong, but he wasn't entirely right either. The other piece of it, the thing I didn't say to Bob because it would have sounded like something from a greeting card, is that Harry made one mistake that I don't think he understood the significance of until it was much too late. He sat in Martha's chair, not because the chair was sacred, not because I'm sentimental in the way that people sometimes condescend to assume about older men, but because a man who sits in a dead woman's chair without asking, in a house that isn't his, in front of her husband, and then tells that husband to fetch him a beer, that man is showing you exactly who he is, exactly how he thinks, exactly what he believes about the person in front of him. He believed I was nothing to be afraid of. He believed I was tired and old and quiet and could be maneuvered without consequence. He was right about the tired. He was right about the quiet. He was wrong about the rest. Detective Morrison called me in February to let me know the Fells sentencing had come down. He mentioned, almost as an aside, that the judge had cited the quality of my documentation in the sentencing memorandum, called it unusually thorough preparation by the complaining party. Unusually thorough. Martha would have laughed herself out of that recliner. She always said I was better at files than feelings, and she was right. But what I did in that motel room on a Tuesday night in in November, with a borrowed bedspread and a slow Wi-Fi connection and my heart running about 15 beats per minute faster than my cardiologist would have liked. That wasn't just filing. That was grief and love and fury, organized into something that could be used. That was 30 years of watching people believe they could take advantage of a man because he was careful and quiet and didn't raise his voice. I had been quiet long enough. I sat in the chair. I put my feet up. I looked at Martha laughing in that photograph, young and sunburned and completely unaware of everything that was coming. I thought, I kept it. I kept what you left me. The light was gray and flat outside. November coming around again. I sat there until it went dark. If you made it this far, you've earned the like.